This subject is about collaboration. How many of you would call yourselves collaborators, generally speaking, on a daily basis? That's good. Hardly any point for you to be here, really, then, is there? Which you could do that quite well. Before we begin, just want to kind of suggest a couple of things to guide me and maybe us in our thinking here. Albert Einstein talked about we can't solve our problems with the same kind of thinking we use to create them. Now, what that kind of tells me and reminds me constantly of is we are blinded quite often by our habits, by our routines, by our cultures, by our way of thinking. And bearing that in mind when you think about going forward in this conversation. Darwin talked about humankind collaborating and being better as a result, prevailing. That also reminds me that we're all products of our genes and of our environment. Some of these things we can't change, i.e. the genes. Some of these things we can change, i.e. the environment. So please bear that in mind as we go forward. And the last one is this nice African proverb that says, to go fast, go alone, to go far, go together. Now that kind of reminds me quite a lot of going fast, going at pace. That kind of often talks about doing it alone, but that has hints of short-termism. Going farther has a more sustainable feel to it. And so when we talk about collaborative working, we should not really be thinking about short-term, although that's useful, but sustainability is probably a better thing to be thinking about. Okay, so there are lots of words that get used around this kind of subject that mean similar things. And I often get people coming to me saying, what's the difference between collaboration and integration and partnership and alliancing and all this kind of thing? There are differences if you go into maybe the legal formats, if you go into some ways of describing an organisation. But I hope that for the purposes of today, we don't get too caught up in definitions. And if we can just work with the principle that collaboration is something that we do to our mutual advantage. Can we accept that for the moment? Would that be okay? Okay. So, in private organisations, there's always a continuous search for restructuring in search of value. And value is the key word I'd like you to keep on using throughout this entire conversation. And why do we want to keep on restructuring? Why do we want to keep on doing that? Well, if you've got an investor, money people behind you, if they invest in your company, they want growth. They don't want to put in 100 million and get 100 million back. They want to put in 100 million and get several hundred millions back. So growth is quite important. And to get growth, companies quite often historically have gone into mergers and acquisitions. Now we won't get into the definitions of that, but mergers mean companies coming together, or you acquire companies to kind of build up your quota or quorum of expertise. Now, they do that to generate income. Now, income comes in the form of increased sales, increased market share, but they also do it to increase synergy. So you get more businesses coming together, you can sort of cut costs, you can make things work better. But that model of mergers and acquisitions, which is still prevalent today, is very costly. Because as you go to buy a business or acquire a business or merge with a business, the cost of doing that is very high. And those costs were more easily met in rich times when there were rich pickings to be had and there was plenty of money around to actually do that. So people would queue up to pay money for you to buy businesses and they can get a return for that. When things get a little bit tighter, businesses then began to explore the idea of how do we kind of reduce some costs. And so the idea of supply chain came along. And supply chain was not doing it yourself, getting somebody else to do it who had the expertise, and just buying the service. And that's very common still today. We do it here in the council. So that's mostly focused on cost reduction and efficiency. But if you're dealing with a supply chain, particularly with private sector providers, then they have their margins, they have their own costs, they build all that in, and you might get a service that's less than the cost that you would normally pay, but there's still a margin. You're still paying their margin, their profit. So that's okay as long as they're maybe cheaper. And it's quite good also in the supply chain. You can let those folks go as and when you feel like it. It's very flexible in that sense. But as we get further and further into supply chain, you find yourself talking about contracts, service level agreements, very carefully worded documents. Then you get into this debate as you didn't agree this with us, or we didn't agree that with you. If you want to have that bit extra, it's going to cost you extra. So supply chain management is still going on, it's still very useful, it saves a lot of money, but you need to be pretty commercially adept to do it properly. Now, what's happening these days is companies are realising we don't have the money for mergers and acquisitions so easily. Supply chain has its difficulties. More often than not, we want something done or built or made that we don't have expertise for. We don't do the research and development. We don't have the knowledge to create products. We don't have the resources or the skill to deliver the services we'd like to deliver. So let me just give you an example of that. If you look at the traditional iPod, which everybody kind of thinks about as being built somewhere in California in the States, it has lots of people involved in building that. So you have the hard disk being built by Toshiba, you have the battery being built by Sony. Now these guys are experts in that area. iPod is not expert in batteries or hard disks or hardware or digital to analog conversion. They have other organisations that do that for them. What iPod did was focused on the design, and they got other organisations to pitch in and use their technology and their know-how to help them build the iPod. Great example of collaboration to help put a product together. Similarly, the Boeing 787, you see the wings are built by Mitsubishi, fuselage by Kawasaki, engines by General Electric and Rolls-Royce. Now these folks are building these things to order as part of a collaboration, and they actually share in some of the risk and the reward. So that collaborative area looks at sharing risk and reward, which is a little bit like supply chain, but you're also not having to take any of this expertise internally, you're taking it all in from somewhere else. Now that's a much cheaper model, better model than maybe mergers and acquisitions or growing the company that way. Similarly with services, you look at for example, the One World Alliance that the airlines do. You join up your frequent flyer service in British Airways, and you'll get benefits in American Airlines or Cathay Pacific. You'll get access to executive washrooms or something like that. But you'll get extra benefits by joining the One World Alliance. And an interesting one, and one that you might not think about, is very interesting form of collaboration is in shopping centres, the retail sector. Now the retail sector is extremely competitive. So what would possess a lot of people, a lot of retail outfits, to collaborate and go into the one shopping centre? That's crazy from a competitive point of view. Why would you go anywhere near where your competitors are? They could take your business away from you. Well, they've thought about that obviously. Shopping malls and shopping centres are very popular, and the reason why that is working is because they've worked out that if they are in a group in one place offering a range of services, the footfall coming into that shopping centre is extremely high, and they're happy to take a portion of that footfall in terms of sales. So it might seem counterintuitive, but it actually works. And I think that's the kind of thinking that happens in collaboration. Some stuff that doesn't appear maybe correct or sensible or rational actually works for real. So, in the public sector then, what's going on there? Well, from what I've seen and what's happening round about me is we are seeing some mergers. We have seen some mergers. We've seen the police organisation come together. We've seen the fire service come together. We're talking about integration of health and social care. But this merger stuff is kind of focused on budgets and effectiveness. It's not focused on new products or new services, not that I'm aware of anyway, because it's a money thing. Money, budgets are the big issue. Supply chain management, council, places like the council, public sector, does supply chain management the same as everybody else. Again, to cut costs and increase efficiency. But this collaboration thing has come along relatively recently. We have talked about collaborating for outcomes, we have talked about partnership, but it seems to be kind of picking up a pace now. And thinking about it, it may have to be done differently, probably will have to be done differently from what we've done previously. Because the emphasis is now on community, having the community involved, having the community influence what we do. It's on the big societies we hear about it. It's not all about the central public services delivering everything. You should be delivering something yourselves or doing something yourselves. And we've had all this stuff from the Christie Commission that tells us what we should be doing in integration, community, getting people involved, distributing what we have, helping have others do this stuff for the big outfits like the councils. So the idea of collaboration is coming on in the public sector as much as it is in the private sector. And that, for me, kind of shows a convergence of trends. So in that convergence kind of shows that we're both heading down away from this kind of large-scale delivery through one kind of hierarchical organisation into large-scale delivery through distributed control. And in the private sector, it's through a patchwork of niche players or niche organisations that got expertise, knowledge, skills. And in the public sector, it's through a patchwork of expertise in terms of skills and knowledge as well. Might not be the same organisations, the patchwork can come from anywhere. So that's the kind of backdrop to what's going on in this kind of collaboration world, both from the private sector point of view and the public sector point of view. In the private sector, there's actually quite a lot of work done in value. And as I said, we'll keep coming back to this idea of value. The research has been done, and it's been done predominantly by a guy called Morton T. Hansen. He's a professor at INSEAD and at Berkeley. He's a professor at Harvard, professor of entrepreneurship. And his research is probably the most recent and probably the most in-depth research available. But he actually shows that in a typical billion-dollar company, which is what, £600,000, £600 million, he can demonstrate that those organisations achieve, on average, a 3% growth in sales, a 3% cost reduction, and a 2% improvement in asset efficiency. Now, just on that cost reduction thing of 3%, just let's put that in perspective. In Aberdeenshire Council, with a budget of around £500 million, saving of 3%, go to the finance guy, he'll tell us it's 15 million right on. So these are significant sums. So there's value to this. It's worthwhile as far as they're concerned. And if you look at a company like Procter & Gamble, which not many people know about Procter & Gamble, they know the brands far better. So you've got all these washing up liquids and various absorbent materials. And they actually did the work there in 2002 to 2005. The revenues went up 15% as a result of collaboration. The net income up 2%, and return on equity, which is the investment, from up 12.6 to 35.6%. Any organisation that gets a return on equity of 36% is doing really, really well. So the point here is, it's not just a kind of hope that we'll be nicer and pleasant and work better with each other. The point here is there's value to this. There's real value. It's been assessed, it's been studied, we know what it is. And I think we have to bear that in mind when we look forward for ourselves.